you're about to spend $1 million, maybe more, or just a little bit less. So factor in frustration. And what does frustration mean? That you look at a lot of property and that sometimes you end up with the pointy end and that you miss out. Factor that in. That's the price to pay to actually buy something that you like at a reasonable figure.
Hey guys, welcome back to Property Chat with Lachy and Matt. We're really excited about the next few episodes. We've got a special guest with us, Tom Panos. He's one of Australia's absolute leading real estate coaches, sees so many markets right around the country and has got some really good insights for us to help both buyers and sellers. So Tom, obviously just to give everyone a little bit of an idea of your background first and foremost, because this is a podcast that's designed to be for buyers and sellers. So when myself and Matt started out the podcast, we really just wanted to help buyers and sellers be better buyers and sellers.
Yeah.
There's, a lot of information out there, and trying to sift through it all and figure out how best to attack the process can be tricky. So for those of you who obviously don't know Tom, one of Australia's leading real estate coaches. Tom, you coach so many of Australia's top agents, of course, and as an auctioneer, you're exposed to so much of the market, both all around the city. Can you give everyone a little bit of an idea of what it is that you do?
95% of the work is in training and development, right? And auctioneering, like yourself, for me, it's only a Saturday thing. But the biggest thing that matters in my life is a thing called the Real Estate Gym, which is a digital subscription-based online coaching platform that I've had. This is year 6, and we've got thousands of members on there. So it's looking after those members, producing content, curating content. That's really where my energy goes. A lot of speaking as well, but speaking's less of it now because of COVID. So a lot of that's been replaced by virtual speaking on Zoom.
Yeah, and as Lachy sort of alluded to, the goal behind the podcast for us was to try and educate buyers and sellers the whole way throughout the process, but as well in different bits and pieces like a marketplace we're in now. One of the big things we've found is there's a lot of confusion for both buyers and sellers as to where the market is now, where it will be over the next sort of 30, 60 or 90 days in a more normal market. Pretty easy to sort of track the normal trends, winter, spring, those sorts of things. But if you were a buyer or seller, what would you be sort of looking at for now in terms of what you see forecast for the next 30, 60 or 90 days?
So if you're a buyer of a principal place of residence, you should be making a decision based on your life, not based on the market. If you're a person that's buying a home to go live in it with your loved ones, you shouldn't be making that decision based on your forecasts on whether the market's going to go up or down. Mm-hmm. And the reason why is that the only way that you can actually get the market right is when the market's moved, because then you can look back. For instance, if you want to say, hey, I want to try and buy, at the bottom of the market, right? The only way that you've bought at the bottom of the market is when the market's actually gone up, because you can then look back and say, there's a reference point. That was the bottom back then. But by that stage, it's obviously too late. Not only that, what actually happens is if you actually miss it, there's actually less properties to pick from, because the reason why the market then has gone up a bit is that there's been less stock.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, what should they be thinking of? If it's a principal place of residence, you should be making a decision based on your life. How is it going to feel like living here? Infrastructure, schools, are we in the right catchment areas? And don't worry too much about whether you're going to save 30, 40 grand, because if you buy the wrong house, because you're buying it on the market, not on the house.
Trying to buy smart.
Yeah, you're going to go sell it in 2-3 years. And then you're going to have to pay legals and stamp duty and agents' commissions, and you're going to have to move. So it's going to be unsettling. So I think it's a terrible strategy to ever buy a home that you're going to live in based on the market. You base it on your life. If you're someone that's looking to invest, then you've got to turn around and say, hey, if I'm more on the younger side, capital growth should matter to me more than a yield play. If you're like me, 53, turning 54, I've made the shift in the last 3 years. I was after growth all the time, right? Growth all the time. And I've invested a lot in real estate over the last 20, 30 years, blocks of units. houses in Newtown and Enmore. That's, I love the inner west. That's where I've invested because I was brought up there. But as I get older, I'm beginning to want set and forget.
Yeah.
Because I don't want the real estate agent ringing me up every 10 minutes. Every time I see the phone number, I think, okay, there's repairs involved in this. So you're just looking for, longer yield plays with stronger tenants that might not have the growth.
Yeah.
So obviously at the moment in the current market, there's a lot of buyer frustration. So one of the things we wanted to ask you is, you coach a lot of agents on how to be better agents, but if you were to coach a buyer at the moment who keeps missing out, they're getting very frustrated by the market, what would you say to them?
Lachlan, I reckon one of the golden rules that I say to buyers, and it was a lesson that was given to me by a Jewish landlord that I managed when we had our own real estate company many years ago. He said, pay the 5%. And what it basically meant is, if you want something, pay that 5% extra. Don't sit there thinking to yourself, I've got to buy right or I'm not buying. Pay the 5%. That would be the first thing. The second thing is, if you don't have the 5%, if you can't go that, right? If it's not you're there, right? So let's talk about that. Then I would, turn around and say, factor in frustration. Don't think it's an unexpected thing. Of course it's an expected thing. You're about to spend $1 million, maybe more, or just a little bit less. So factor in frustration. And what does frustration mean? That you look at a lot of property and that sometimes you end up with the pointy end and that you miss out. Factor that in. That's the price to pay to actually buy something that you like at a reasonable figure. The third thing is, if you're constantly missing out, if you realize that I'm constantly missing out and you haven't got the 5%, the next thing to do is you go to the next suburb that's a touch lower.
Yeah.
Right? And then you make this your new farm area as a buyer to focus on. That would be it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, for a lot of buyers out there, especially at the moment when we are seeing, different farm areas starting to grow as well, that's been something that they've been doing and moving out to different suburbs, which has been, especially for us on the coast, we're seeing some of those, what we would consider a fringe suburb, climbing quite rapidly. So it's been outstanding for all the vendors that, wouldn't necessarily get that level of interest in those suburbs.
And I think if you're a buyer, it's actually got better off now.
Yeah.
If you're a buyer, I actually think to myself, you now have more choice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yes, we were talking off camera and you did indicate there was a property that you auctioned the other day that went 700 over reserve. So what we're seeing is less of those incredible results. They're still there, but we're seeing less of them. But we're also beginning to see far more opportunities. And what I've noticed is buyers, we talk about buyers being frustrated. What I've actually noticed happening in the market is fear of missing out has actually started to pervade vendors, not buyers so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd agree with that big time.
Yeah.
We're even seeing vendors hesitant to come to market because of that. Market's so hot, it's relative if you're staying in the same area for a lot of them. So
yeah, but right now, if you're a buyer and you have been frustrated, I actually think you'll be less frustrated, and depending on when this podcast is actually being streamed, but we're talking about now, we're in June 2021, right? And, or just about to hit June. And all I'll say to you is that I actually think June, July, August are going to be reasonable periods for buyers.
Okay.
And I think that's really interesting what you just said there about the fear of missing out for the sellers. I want to sort of focus in on that a little bit because I guess I see that as being the thing that's going to turn this market around. When we have sellers starting to think that the market might be starting to shift or it might be just nearing the peak, that's when we would expect that we're going to see a flood of stock. Now, if we have a traditional, a non-traditional winter and we see quite a lot of stock through winter where we don't normally, and then we carry through and have a strong spring, you would expect it's going to swing quite a way back the other way.
Yeah, and I think that's what's actually happening. I'm thinking to myself that there's a heap of sellers that have realised, hey, my house has gone up 20% in the last 6-8 months. Then they're beginning to read a few of the articles, fixed rates gone up a bit, clearance rates eased a little bit, more stock coming to the market. So what you're seeing is a lot of sellers are fast tracking their plans.
Yeah.
They were thinking about hitting the market in spring, now they're hitting the market in winter. People aren't travelling overseas because of COVID-19 restrictions. So we're going to see turnover activity and a decent amount of property consumed. The absorption rate in real estate was very heavily focused towards the seller. So every bit of stock that was coming on was being consumed very, very quickly. The absorption rate now is moving a little bit, not to more balance. It's still suited towards the seller. But I've noticed right now that, and we talked about it off camera, you're not getting 15 people that miss out on a property. You're getting 4 missing out on properties.
Yep.
We're getting 5, and there's always one standout buyer that's paying a little bit more than the others. So, I'm thinking to myself, sellers are rushing to get onto the market because they want to recoup good profits that they've made. And there's a few that are using a strategy called sell high, buy low.
Yeah.
And that strategy basically it's a very risky strategy, because what you're trying to do is sort of say, I'll sell when the market's up here and I'll buy when the market's here, right? So you've got to actually try and get that right 2 times.
Yes.
Wonder how many people have pulled that off in their life. It'd be a pretty tricky thing to get right.
It's a tricky thing, and I think it's not a good game to play.
No.
I think there's other games that you can play, and time in the market versus timing the market is a far better game to play.
I love that. I think one of the things I've also seen focused on massively at the moment is obviously a lot of noise around underquoting, and it comes up in every hot market, because I think sometimes prices move too quick for agents to actually keep up to date with it, and same thing with vendors. I know often I've gone into some listings that you think you've done all the research right, and you go in there and you pitch for the business, you miss it, the competitor gets it, and you think there's no way it goes for that, and it does, and they pull that kind of money. Like we had one that just sold in Terrigal for $750,000 more than they bought it 12 months ago, and done nothing to it. Do you think the noise around underquoting has had any impact to maybe parts of that buyer frustration, and maybe seeing some buyers start to put it on hold now?
I don't know whether the cause of buyers pressing the pause button in buying is got to do with underquoting specifically. I think it's got to do with the number that they wanted to pay and the price it's sold for has disappointed them, and they've turned around and they've just decided, hey, I'm not going to participate in this. It's too hot. I've seen a lot of that. I've seen people turn around and say, you know what, I'm walking away. Underquoting is an interesting subject, because there are 2 times when people say that's underquoting, but some of the times it's not underquoting.
100%.
Right?
And that's why I wanted to bring it up, because I thought you of all people would have seen a lot of this.
Yeah. So underquoting is the deliberate act of deceiving people as to the number that you thought that the property would sell for, and that you're quoting a figure under that to create a bidding frenzy, with you being very certain in your head that this was a price bait tactic. That's underquoting. It's wrong. A property that sells at a figure higher than what you expected and higher than what the buyers expected is not underquoting if the real estate agent was quoting a figure that they'd actually told the owners, put on an agency agreement. And we've seen a lot of those. I mean, the one that you just spoke about, the one that you spoke about off camera, and I see them regularly, is not underquoting. In fact, I have a number of times I've had buyers that have said to me, you know what, like, this is a joke. And they've even said, I'm going to go to the Office of Fair Trading, and I actually often give them the phone number. I say, listen, here's the phone number, because I'm really confident that the agent I'm dealing with has not been using price baiting. And then I'll go quickly speak to them and I'll say, I want to ask you, what were you quoting, and what was the owner expecting? And in all instances, it hasn't been underquoting. It's gone off.
And it's disappointing, because you go through that process, and as an agent, I know myself, and you guys would probably feel the same as an auctioneer. Those underbidders you do genuinely have empathy for, because they've missed out. They've put effort into being there come auction day, whether that's pest and building, strata reports, contracts, all that kind of stuff, and then even just the emotional investment in thinking you're going to get it. So when they do blow out massively, whether it's been through the agent underquoting or just a genuinely great auction campaign, it is, a little bit disheartening when you hear a buyer sort of push back and say, well, I was never in the running, when you genuinely did everything right.
1,000,000%. I agree. I think it's wrong. These people get emotionally connected and they put a lot of time, energy and resources into it. And when there has been absolute certainty by the agent that this was not going to be selling anywhere near that figure, they have been compliant in deception.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that comes back to, like what you were just saying, in the agent promising something which they can't really guarantee. It's all well and good to give them an indication of where you're expecting it to be, but obviously making it clear, especially to a buyer in a position where it's going to impact them quite a lot, that it could well travel above that given the market conditions, and that the seller's reserve or the seller's expectation may not end up being that relevant to what it ends up going for. So I think that's very important. The other thing, of course, Tom, which we were talking about, things that might start to slow the market, and the quotes perhaps have that possibility of doing that as well. Because obviously as the agents start to see these results, each time they bring a new property to the market, that quote does have to be a little bit higher. Now, some of those results, as we all know, have happened because of a perfect storm of particular buyers in a particular market, a particular street even, at the same time. Exactly, and all of those factors. After that buyer's bought and that buyer's bought and maybe a little bit more stock comes on, that result may not actually be repeatable. So how do you sort of see agents managing that over the next few months as we start to get to this period where the quotes are higher and maybe the supply is a little bit greater?
Challenging. It is challenging, there's no question. So I refer that to as a transition market. So what's actually happening is it's being at a certain level and then all of a sudden there's a shift in it, right? So unfortunately you have reference points, and reference points act as, a line in the sand for a seller. What are some of the strategies that I see agents need to be doing to keep their vendors informed? And that is not using comparables of 2 months, using comparables of 2 days. You've got to be finding the transactions that have actually sold that week. So the frequency and the date of the reference points you're using have to be narrowed down. Very important. The second thing a vendor that's listening to this should be aware of is that if there is an easing of the market because it's being transitioned from here, not down to here, but sort of to here.
Just a softening.
Softening. That's good news. That's good news. And the reason it's good news is that as a buyer, which most sellers are, you're going to come through the other side with better choices for the properties that you're going to be bidding on or putting offers in. You'll probably also get it at a better price. And if you're an upgrader, which many people are, you're probably going to be better off because the one that you're going to buy has probably eased more than the one you're going to sell. So you're actually in a better spot. But the average person doesn't look at it because they're looking at only one chapter of a 2-chapter book.
Yeah.
The 2 chapters of the book is what I sell for and what I buy for. And that's changeover number is how you're commercially impacted. But your average consumer is sitting there being quite myopic in the process because they're saying, I need to get 1 million, I need to get 1 million, I need to get 1 million, right? But they're not thinking, hang on a second, I don't have to pay 1.3 anymore. I can pay 1.25, right? So let's assume that, hey, I drop the sale of my property by 30 grand and I buy for 50 grand less. I'm actually 20 grand in front in a transition market. So it's good news.
And it's funny how they look at it in a market like this. Like the number one thing I'm hearing in every market appraisal is, Matt, I know the prices are hot, but if I sell, I'm going to be paying that. But I've noticed the same thing when I did work in a harder market, like after the Banking Royal Commission. That was a really big transition. That was tough. And it was interesting that they had lost touch with that relativity, that what they sell for, they'll end up buying in that lower market, which makes a big difference. But it's funny, the quote that I heard you say during that period has literally stuck with me the whole way through, which was making sure that you're in the market, not on the market. And it's something that I think of even in a hot market, making sure that you're not pricing yourself outside of what would be considered, good value for that property.
Yeah, at any one time, you've either got vendors that are staying or vendors that are selling. And what I notice is the vendors that are staying are helping support the vendors that are selling.
Yeah.
Because what they do is actually say, hey, look, that's $1 million. This is a good buy. So sooner or later, you've got to sort of, as a vendor, say, am I going to be one that sells or one that stays?